Well, good morning. So we're continuing. This is week 3 or part 3 of this idea we've been working with called the Prosperity 10 Commandments. It's actually the 10 Commandments reinterpreted as what we call the Prosperity 10 Commandments. And my subtitle has been the Divine Source That Never Fails. Okay. And it's real interesting, this idea of prosperity in the class, Prosperity Plus 3, that's going on right now after service. There are several areas that you're asked, how important are these in terms of your vision of prosperity? And they're health and well-being. I mean, we'd all say that if we feel healthy, we feel prosperous, right? Health and well-being is very important. There is your relationships. You have good relationships that, it makes you feel prosperous. Your vocation, you wake up in the morning and whether you go to work or you're retired, but you've got things that you do during the day that really invigorate you. You can't wait to get up in the morning to do those particular things. And the last one, of course, is the financial wherewithal to live the life you want to live, go on vacations and do the things you love doing. So it's kind of a wide, broad spectrum when you talk about the idea, what does it mean to be prosperous and, have lots of abundance. My sort of approach to this process is, I love good storytellers, people who can tell a story about this person did this particular thing and, by following these rules and regulations and these procedures, they became very successful. And the thing I find about a story, it's great and inspirational, but sometimes you say to yourself, well, how did they really do that? What was the underlying thinking behind what made that story work for this particular person? And that's sort of what my lessons try to get at, is what are the dynamics behind the process that causes success in an individual's lives. And so we kind of look at the deeper underlying dynamics behind it. Oh, can everybody hear me? Oh, you're not hearing me? Is that better? Yes. Oh, okay, all right. I was talking to myself? All right. All right. Monica, can you hear me? Oh, okay. All right. So anyway, on a daily basis, we kind of find ourselves in a battle, or if you don't like that word, battle, a competition. And, it's between the aspects of our thinking that believe in the power of the truth principles that we're learning. And, and they inspire us. And that's why we call ourselves truth students, because we study truth and we try to live by that truth. But we find ourselves in a battle between trying to live from those truth principles and the adversary. Now, we know in Unity we don't look at, there's no anthropomorphic being called the devil or an adversary, but the adversary is the adversarial thoughts or thinking that we go through that kind of knock us off, our whole spiritual path that we try to stay on. So the dynamic here is, how do I balance that idea? And you've heard me talk about, any people used to watch Daffy Duck, the Daffy Duck cartoons, and he would have the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other, both going at him, trying to, tell him what he should be doing. And I think we all kind of experience that. And there are those of us who are experiencing the inner battle may sometimes feel overwhelmed or defeated by it. And, we're trying to figure out, how do I overcome these things that are always happening in my head? Or maybe it's just me. Anybody else have stuff going on in your head? You're going, how do I get, what is this all about? And how do I get through this? Okay. And so we all are going through that. And even if you develop a little bit of spiritual muscle where you can feel challenged but not defeated. You get what I'm saying? You're developing that spiritual muscle. Yeah, you still feel challenged, but you don't feel defeated by this. We still find ourselves working the process, the spiritual process, cautiously as opposed to boldly. You see what I'm saying? So that's the thing. How do I get to the place where I can boldly demonstrate that I know that God is active in my life and affairs, as opposed to kind of tiptoeing through and hoping that, this particular concept will work. But there are those of us who do step out boldly, into the battle between the adversary and the truth that's always raging war in our heads. And we feel ourselves fully clad in the armor of truth as we stare down the beast that's trying to intimidate us. Does that make sense? Okay. And it's not to say that, we're not affected by what's occurring around us, but what it does mean is that we remain fully vested in God as the true source of our good, and we stay in that mindset no matter what is going on. Okay, that's sort of the thing. So this fully clad in the armor of truth means that, I've got it in my mind. I've got a good mindset for it. And, you'll hear in this particular talk, as I do often, I go over some of the same principles over and over again as I add new dynamics to it. Does that make sense? One couple of reasons why I do that. One is because we don't always remember all of the concepts. The other is that there are people who are watching on the internet or new people who come here who, might like to hear some of the underlying processes. So for those of us who have not heard this analogy before, what we want to work at is this idea of not giving our sense of I am to the challenges in our lives, okay? And some of you have heard me talk about that. And the sense of I am is that, whenever we're struggling with something, we have a tendency to take on the identity of it, and that we don't want to erroneously give our I am to the thing that we're struggling with. For example, I am sick, I am depressed, I am angry, I am overwhelmed, I am afraid I won't have enough, You get me, Now, yes, those things may be happening in your life, but it's not making it your identity. We were talking about some people last week in the office. We heard some folks talking about arthritis. And you heard the term Uncle Arthur, right? Right? And so they're making arthritis their identity, as opposed to it's something that is going on, but I don't identify as being that thing. That's sort of the concept. So it's a very fine line, difficulty between, having the experience but not being the experience. That's why Jesus said, I am in the world, but not of it. All right? And so it's sort of moving to that idea. And so while these experiences are a fact, you want to keep your identity intact. You don't want to give yourself over to the thing that you're struggling with, whether it's physical or emotional. And as much as possible, you want to identify yourself mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually as being healthy and well, positive and optimistic, prosperous, and magnetically drawing to yourself unseen resources and transformative experiences. So that when you keep your mind focused on the good that you want, as opposed to what you may be experiencing, you are putting out an electromagnetic dynamic that's going to draw that good to you. But if you've submitted yourself to this is my life, this struggle that I'm going through, then you're going to draw more of that to you as well. Okay, we're going to talk more about that law and how that happens. So as much as possible, you want to identify yourself with those things that you really want. And as I said in last week's lesson, we receive by becoming open and receptive to God's living spirit of truth, and by repudiating the evidence of our senses, which are so convincingly trying to convince us of something other than God. All right? And the word repudiate is perfect for this case because it means to reject the validity or authority of something. And in the case of this lesson, what we are, as true students, we're repudiating or rejecting the perceived validity and authority of adverse situations that are trying to convince us or deny us of our faith in God. Did that all make sense? Okay. So, how did Jesus say? Get thee behind me, Satan. Okay. So Satan are those thoughts that are trying to take you away from being grounded in faith. All right. And the request of this lesson, this series of lessons, is to get every one of us in the same mindset where we feel fully clad in the armor of truth. All right. No one in this church or listening on the internet has the ability to hold onto the truth more than anybody else. We all have the ability to hold on to that truth. Okay. But it's a practiced process. Okay. You have to be conscious all the time. I always talk to my students at the college about being awake. You have to be fully awake all the time, that this thing that is happening, no matter what it is trying to help you to wake up and realize that you need to hold on to your position of being Christ-centered. Okay? And stuff is going to happen all the time to try to knock you off that center. All right, so you have to practice. It's almost like when stuff happens, you got to go, whoa, another chance to practice. All right? And you hold to that center no matter what. So to get us there, of holding this place, let's review for a moment the idea of universal law, okay? Meaning the omnipresent, boundless, infinite law that stands under and supports all the order in the universe, the law that's referred to in the Bible as the Lord, okay? So the word Lord means law. Now, the word law means principle, and a principle is a standard that is required to maintain balance, order, and harmony. And in other words, you could not have balance, order, and harmony in the absence of the principle or law to direct all the activities and processes in the same manner. There's got to be a law, all right? And everything is under the law. Now, so for example, in those times when your life feels chaotic, it's usually an indication that you have let fear, some fear-based adversarial thoughts, upset your spiritual balance, thus creating disorder and disharmony in your life and affairs. Okay? So that you always have to look at yourself. You get up in the morning, look in the mirror, and you go, ooh, that's me. All right? Or what if somebody looked in the mirror and says, you got to be kidding. All right? But anyway, you look in the mirror and you kind of set your tone, all right, of how you're going to be when you step out into the world. Because as soon as you step out, stuff's going to happen, right? You're just going to know that's going to happen. So, you set yourself, your mindset, but it's so that you can maintain the order and harmony in your life. But remember, the lack of that order and harmony is an indication that you've moved off that center. You moved off that balance, okay? So if you were on a balance beam, you would know that if you started tilting to the side, you got to tilt back a little bit more until you get to that center. It's sort of the same idea, right? Now, it's important for us to constantly remind ourselves that God is the one and only true law, the law of the universe, and even God, listen carefully, even God as pure consciousness is under the directive of the law that God is. In other words, God cannot be anything other than God, all right? And God operates under that same law because God is the law, all right? So let me repeat again. The Lord is even the Lord or law unto itself, and it rules with one purpose, that being to establish and maintain the balance, order, and harmony of the whole, okay? And it is our work as true students to remain vigilant that our thoughts, words, and actions keep us steadfast in the law that maintains balance, order, and harmony in our life and affairs. So when a fearful thought comes up, it's our work to stay balanced, maintain order, and harmony. Okay? So this is called The Work by Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. Okay? You have to work at this process. It's like, Pam and I were doing business yesterday, and the guy says, how did you guys stay together that long? And we both looked and said, it was work. Right? I mean, we're kind of, in the bliss right now, but it was a lot of work to get to that point. Okay? So we got to keep our minds that this is not a process where we just say, oh, I've got it. It's like, you go through baptism and you think, well, now no, that was just the beginning of the process, okay? So again, so the basis of this week's lesson is you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold guiltless anyone who takes his name in vain. So let's try to understand what that means. It's interesting, we a lot of times we'll say that means don't curse. We know we ain't going there, right? I mean, something happens and it's like, whoa, right? It came right out of your mouth and you didn't realize you said it, right? Okay. It really has nothing to do with that. It's a whole bigger spectrum than that, okay? So, and we're going to try to, so as we said earlier, it's imperative that we remain constantly vigilant of how we use the words I am, all right? As we all know, this is the name that God gave to Moses when Moses said, who shall I say sent me? And he got, I am that I am, okay? Now, actually those who haven't heard this before, I am is God. I am conscious is the Christ, and I am expressed is the Holy Spirit. Okay? So I am is God, I am conscious is the Christ, and I am expressed as the Holy Spirit. And we're going to talk more about that. So when we take time to become still, practicing prayer meditation, we're seeking communion or holy union with God, listening for divine guidance. And when we become aware of the divine guidance we're receiving, this represents divine ideas coming from God mind through our Christ consciousness. Okay? That's why Jesus said in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. Not through me, Jesus the man, but through the Christ that Jesus had become conscious of. All right? So Father, Son, Holy Spirit, or God, Christ, Holy Spirit, that Christ, which exists within us, is the one that takes the infinite potentiality that God is and begins to form it, or as Deepak would call the Christ, the quantum realm, begin to form it into divine ideas that we can eventually move forward on and have them expressed in our lives. Okay, we'll keep working with that. All right. So as we said earlier, whenever we are struggling with something or against something, our tendency is to falsely use our I am to erroneously describe ourselves as the thing we're struggling with. Want me to say that again? Okay, so whenever we find ourselves struggling with or against something, our tendency is to falsely use our I am to erroneously describe ourselves as being the thing we're struggling with. So if we don't have enough money, I am broke or I'm poor. We don't have enough health, I am sick, I'm sickly. You follow what I'm saying? Okay, so that's really a false use of the I am, because we just say, well, I am, I'm just talking about me. But God made it clear, I am that I am. And we are the eachness of the allness, the individual expression of the divine idea that God is. So when I use I am, and if I use it negatively, I'm taking the Lord's name in vain. You get it? So just because you don't say a curse word, don't mean a thing. Right? It's what are you using how are you using that I am statement? And as we said, even though factually the thing that you are describing is a fact, you are going through this, experiencing this, it still does not you still don't want it to identify yourself, meaning your I am, as actually being that negative experience. So it's a fine line in the process. It's a fine line in the process. It's like, when you go to the doctor, well, what do I say? You're right? Okay? But it would, you might say, I'm experiencing this. Okay? But we get ourselves wrapped up into I am this. And then we go through all the dynamics and processes of, being that whole expression. And then people, when they think about you as being that expression of whatever it is you're struggling with, So, so this idea that I am as we know it is the name of God. And as we read in Thomas Trowett's book, if you haven't, Thomas Trowett is a profound writer of Bible interpretation. His book, Bible Mystery and Bible Meaning. You've heard me say this before. The name Moses inquired about turned out to be no name. So if you talk to our Jewish brothers, they typically won't even say the word God because it is the name of that which cannot be named. It's too infinite to bring it down to a three-letter word. Okay? So let me say it again. The name Moses inquired about turned out to be no name, but the first person singular of the verb to be in its indicative mode. Right? Now, the indicative meaning is the statement of a fact. In other words, I am that I am. It's stating God is saying God is to be. Okay? I am that I am. Now, to be, if we say God is to be, your question would be, to be what? All right? God is infinite potentiality with the ability to manifest through you as anything in accordance with the nature of your consciousness. I am that I am. I am to be. You say, well, to be what, God? To be whatever you will allow me to be through your consciousness. Okay? Right now, I just am. But I am that I am to be has to happen through you. Okay? So, and so again, God's name is I am infinite potentiality to be. I am infinite potentiality to be. If you think about God that way, I am infinite potentiality to be. And Troward says, it's not a name, but it's a statement of possibilities. I am an infinite potentiality to be. I am a statement of infinite potentiality. Whatever you want, I'm here to be it. Is everybody grasping that? Okay. So, and because this is a complicated subject, here's another shot at describing what God is. God is first cause, the source from which all things that are made are made. Now, Georgiana Tree West says, she's the writer of the book The Light is coming from, he says, I am is the name of that living, loving, wise power, which is pure being, the invisible reality of all that is made manifest. Okay? So if we go back to a story, if you hear a story, and somebody says, like in the Secret, the book The Secret, has a lot of stories in it about how people did this and they became very successful. Guy says, I want a Cadillac, and he put his mind to it, and he did all these things, and boom, a Cadillac appeared in his driveway. He said, well, how the heck did he do that, right? Well, the dynamic here is that the essence of it is that you tap so much into this living, loving, wise power, which is a pure being, the invisible reality of things that are made manifest. You tap so much into it that it becomes that in your life. Okay? Now, again, from Thomas Troward, he says, and I want to say this slowly because this is a little deep. Troward is just, he's out there. He says, I am is being in the absolute, which means when we ask God for things, the thing you're asking God for, God really knows nothing about that, because God is nothing but what? Pure potentiality, okay? So I am is being in the absolute. And the first originating plane of pure spirit means infinite potential, where, because the material does not yet exist, okay, there can be no extension in space and consequently no sequence in time. Meaning, when you ask God for something, God doesn't operate in space and time. As soon as you ask, the Father completed, the Father responds. As soon as you ask, then you go, well, where is it? Well, in God, there is no space and time. It exists in you. You become the space-time continuum that would eventually allow that to come into expression. Okay? But as soon as you ask, God says yes. All right? But it has to be you that comes. It's sort of like the song, open my eyes that I may see glimpses of truth thou hast for me. Place in my hand the wonderful key that shall unlock the key. Shall unlock the things for me. So, that song, right? And so the thing is, open my eyes that I may see, is that you have asked, God is given, you don't see it yet, but you need to become spiritually awake to the fact that that which you've asked for has already been given to you. Okay? So in short, God just is what you ask, the infinite potential to be what you ask, whatever you name God to be, which is why you do not ever want to use God's name in vain, which is what we do when we use the statements like, I am depressed, I am angry, you follow me? Yeah. Okay? So you don't ever want to use God's name in vain. That means a lot of times when you get ready to pass your lips, as Patty's father used to say, engage your brain before you shoot off your mouth. Okay? Now, this doesn't mean, it doesn't mean to deny what you're experiencing physically or emotionally. You get it? It doesn't mean to deny that. Okay? It means don't let what you're experiencing redefine the spiritual essence of who you are in truth. All right. And you can struggle with things for a long time, but don't let it, don't become the people say, how you doing? And that becomes the first thing out of your mouth. Okay? It's a slippery slope that you have to pay attention to. Okay? Now remember, God as law or Lord of the universe rules with one purpose, that being to continuously reestablish and maintain the balance, order, and harmony of the whole. Okay. Now that reestablishment means, you know your body is constantly regenerating itself. You know that, right? The body's constantly regenerating itself. So as we do things that cause the body to degenerate, the body constantly is trying to regenerate. That's why fasting is so important, because when you're fasting, the body says, no more garbage in, I can start getting garbage out. Right? So when you're sleeping at night and so forth, and I don't know how many people have heard of intermittent fasting. It's becoming a really high, it started with bodybuilders, and that's now the medical profession has really jumped on it. But like for my diet, I go 18 hours between, there's a period of 18 hours where I don't eat, okay? And then there's a short period of window when I do eat. That time when I'm not eating, the body is just cleansing, okay? And you can look it up on the internet. There's tons of information on it. Medical profession has really jumped on it, but it started out with bodybuilders, you know. But anyway, so I was just saying that to say that you want to get your whole dynamic self into a situation where you take that time to let your spirit really keep percolating back up to the top, because we do stuff, degenerates the body, and the body says, okay, I want to regenerate. But we also degenerate our spiritual awareness, and prayer and meditation is allowing that spiritual awareness to regenerate. And that's why Jesus had to leave the crowd every so often, go up to the mountaintop, chill, right? And then come back down and deal with what was going on again, all right? So when we use the name of the Lord in vain with negative statements, like we just mentioned, we are falsely taking the name of that which is infinite and abundant and applying it to something finite, negative, and limiting. And the consequences of this is that infinite potential in the first originating plane of pure spirit, where material does not yet exist, comes into existence in accordance with what you just named it. Okay. All right. That's good. So when you use the name of the Lord in vain with negative statements, like just mentioned, we're falsely taking the name of that which is infinite and abundant and applying it to something finite, negative, and limiting. And the consequences of that is that this infinite potential in the first originating plane of pure spirit, where the material does not yet exist, comes into existence in accordance with what you just named it. Okay? And then you say, why me, Lord? Okay. Now, here's a story that came out of Science of Mind magazine a few years back that's going to hopefully explain this whole thing. Imagine a universe that's nothing but water, permeated by infinite intelligence. So you're in water permeated by infinite intelligence, and it is in this water that we live and move and have our being. Imagine that every time you think about something, this infinite intelligence moves as we think. It moves in unison with our thoughts, and ice is formed in the water exactly according to your individual thought. Everybody following me? Okay, so each of us would be surrounded by countless pieces of ice, different colors, forms, sizes, according to the nature of our thoughts and words. However, regardless of whether these pieces of ice seem to be good or bad, positive or negative, they would still, in essence, be water. So if you do not like what you are surrounded by, you could melt the ice back into water and start again. Nothing would have changed from water to ice and back to water again except the form. And no matter what form the water took in accordance with our thoughts, all the time the water would still be water. All right? It is just that at one time it is formed, at another time it is fluid. But the shape it took on when it formed was governed by your mind according to the law of mind action, and the events and circumstances around the form would also be according to the nature of the thoughts that you're forming. So we live in the water or the ocean that is God. And we're constantly taking God energy and we're forming it into our life experience. And he said, if you don't like your life experience, let that dissolve back into God and then reshape it into what you want. Does that make sense? All right? But no matter how it looks in your life, good or bad, right or wrong, positive, negative, it's still God. Because God is pure, infinite potentiality, doesn't care what you do with it. It's like yesterday we were, and again, in this business arrangement thing we were doing, we got into a spiritual conversation, and God was telling us about how his life, was such a struggle. He almost died several times and blah, blah. And he says, but I found the Lord. I found Jesus. And he said, I went out on my own and did my thing. And I kind of left the Lord. And I said, yeah. The Lord said, yeah, go on and do your thing. I'll be here when you get back. And he got it. He goes, yep, that's what happened. And it's really not so much that I thought about it later. It's not God telling you, go out and do your thing. I'll be here when you get back. When you go out to do your thing, God is right there with you. And so the thing you experienced that you said is so horrible, it would have been 10 times worse, 1,000 times worse, 1,000,000 times worse if God had not been right there with you. God can never not be God, who is omnipresent, always with you. And so like the analogy of the water, God is the omnipresence of which we think, speak, and act. God is omnipresent as the activity of the creative mind is omnipresent, omniactive, and we are constantly immersed in the omnipresent, omniactive, creative energy mind that God is. You can never be where God is not. Okay? Because I don't know if you ever have a thought sometime going, man, I'm so glad nobody could hear that thought. But you're having that thought or that feeling right in that which God is. But, and it was, oh, God, please forgive me. I don't know if maybe I've ever said that. Oh, God, please forgive me. And God's kind of going, huh? I mean, I'm not judging you one way or the other. I'm just being here, flowing with you. You want to form me into this, I'll be that. You want to get wise enough to dissolve that and create something else, I will be that. All right? So, and it's the omnipresent, omniactive, creative energy that God is what Jesus called the kingdom of heaven. All right? Or which Paul spoke of in Acts 17:27 and said, yet God is not far from us. It is in him whom we live and breathe and have our being. So if we live and move and have our being in an atmosphere of divine creative energy, it stands to reason that everything we think, say, and do will fall upon the prime directive of the creative law, which is the law of mind action. Okay? So, how does the law of mind action work? Most of us have heard the law of mind and action, okay? Our mind creates in its own image and likeness. So listen carefully. Our mind creates in its own image and likeness. It is a chapter I told in a marketing book on perception, meaning nobody sees the same thing in the same way. We see it in our own image and likeness. Is everybody following that? Yes. See, that's how Pam and I have lasted so long, because we realized she sees it her way, I see it my way. And we don't try to change each other. You learned that. 1 year. Joy's had 1 year. Let's give her a hand. 1 year of marriage. And you've learned that already, Joy. That's a good thing. All right? So we create everything in our own image and likeness. So our mind creates its own image and likeness, the idea of what we believe about ourselves in our life. All right? Now, the idea that we just created about what we believe about ourselves in our life, that creates the thought in its image and likeness, in accordance with what we believe about ourselves and our life. The thought produces words in its image and likeness, and words produce or manifest according to its image and likeness, all in accordance with what we believe about ourselves and our life. Right? That's not even metaphysics. That's just simple. That's the way it is. We see it exactly the way we see it, and sometimes, those of us who live and have partnerships and stuff, it's like, why can't you see it this way? What is wrong with you? You can't see it this way. Well, I can't see it this way because I'm not looking at it through your eyes, your mind, your history. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. So to illustrate, if my mind is clearly focused on love, health, and prosperity, I will produce thoughts of love, health, and prosperity. Therefore, I will produce words of love, health, and prosperity. My thoughts and words will radiate like a radio waves out into the divine substance surrounding me, electromagnetically drawing circumstances or relationships of love, health, and prosperity to me. And let me share with you guys, it works. It works. The thing you want to work on is when little things happen that bring you great joy, that you want more of. You got to become fully conscious of that thing and just embrace it. You know, Pam and I, last week, every Monday, we've been trying to go to museums in D.C. And went to a museum. Then we went to this fabulous restaurant, fabulous. And we're sitting, what was it called?
Oh, you talking about the grill?
The first restaurant we went to, we went last week to the Old Ebbitt Grill. Who's been there? Yeah, nice, right? Nice. And we're sitting in the Old Ebbitt Grill, you know, and so Pam said, what we ordering? And she said, let's get a bowl of cream of mushroom soup and share it. The reason why she said that is because there was a time that's all we could afford. You know? And so we embrace that moment. Yes, we can now do moments and moments and moments like that, right? But we are fully conscious of the joy we get from the things we are doing that are so fabulous, so we can just keep multiplying those things. All right, that's what I'm talking about. That's what it looks like. Okay, so our thoughts and words radiate out to affect the electromagnetic field according to their nature. Now, it's important to understand the difference between affect and effect. All right. Now, affect is usually a verb, and it means to impact or change something. Effect is usually a noun, and effect is a result of the change, right? So hopefully, in the context of what we're exploring, we are beginning to understand how our thoughts and words and actions affect and impact the divine substance or ocean of infinite potentiality in which we live and breathe and have our being. And what we experience in our outer is the effect of the affect or impact of our thoughts upon the thing that we're living in. That make sense? Okay? So every time you get an effect that you don't like, you got to go back to how did I affect the divine substance with what I was thinking or doing. Okay? So even in this spiritual community here, this is important. You know, if you're here for the announcement I did last week, and I'm going to do the announcement again because this is important. We must collectively hold the vision and speak the words and demonstrate by our actions our vision for our spiritually rich community that's filled with all the spiritual and wonderful things that we want. That has to be a collective mindset, okay? Right now, it's not a collective mindset. It's dispersed with all kinds of different ideas. We have to have one mind working collectively towards that idea. And as we say what we want, as we say what we want and what we're praying for that we want, we have to move our feet by demonstrating our willingness to be able to contribute to the collective vision of UCL. It's got to be a collective process, else you'll have spatterings of things happening in different places. All right? Now, collectively, our consciousness has gotten us to this place, which is beautiful. But if we want to move on from here, that's one mind moving together. And a unified field, which is God, interacts with your thoughts and words to create a rich, vital, healthy experience for you, but can only do so in accordance with what you believe is possible for you, which is why you never want to use the Lord's name in vain. All right? Hold that vision of what you want and hold it no matter what you are experiencing. Now, discipline is the way of the disciple. Okay, my chiropractor, he studies martial arts, and I told him I grew up in martial arts. He says, well, when did you kind of stop doing martial arts? I said, probably in my 50s. I began to slow down to actually going to martial arts classes and really working at it. I said, but what I still have on all of my life is the discipline that I learned in martial arts. Okay? So discipline is the way of the disciple. And as true students, we will either discipline ourselves to follow the way of spirit, believing with all our heart, mind, soul, and spirit that God is the source of all the good in our lives, or we will allow ourselves to fall under the influence of those situations and circumstances that try to knock us off our spiritual balance. It'll be one or the other. You got to make the choice. Okay? Am I going to stay in balance, or am I going to let myself get knocked off balance? Okay? So I'm going to end with this affirmation. I want you to affirm it with me. I have faith in the power of my words. Together? I have faith in the power of my words. I speak only that which I desire to see manifest in my life. I see only that which I desire to see manifest in my life. Amen.